Hi, this is Rohin Dharmakumar, and I'm excited to welcome you to episode 31 of First Principles. I know this was supposed to be an off week for us as a fortnightly show. We used to release new episodes every other Thursday, and last Thursday was our episode with Ritesh Agarwal of Oyo Rooms. So, what am I doing today, you must be wondering? That's what I'm here to tell you. Starting this week, First Principles is now a weekly podcast. We are going to bring you a fresh conversation every Thursday, but in a slightly different way. You see, the supply of truly original, accomplished, and candid founders and business leaders in India is what I'd call a finite resource. So, while we'd love to, at some point, have a roster of guests talking to us every single week, that isn't possible today. So, we're doing the next best thing. We increase the duration of our conversations with leaders we meet to roughly 2 hours each, only to split it into two distinct conversations and episodes. That's right. Take today's episode. A couple of weeks ago, you heard my conversation with Karthik Jayaraman, the co founder and CEO of WayCool Foods, an agri-tech startup that distributes and processes fresh produce, grains, staples, and milk. It was a wonderfully candid and authentic conversation in which Karthik spoke about complementing instead of disrupting, treading lightly while making decisions, and starting up at 40. But what you didn't hear in that conversation is what we're releasing today as an episode 31. We talk about why Karthik took such a big risk at 40 by jumping from automobiles into a completely different sector, agri-tech. He also reflects on his career, what got him here, and what keeps him going. We talked about who Karthik is as a leader and as a CEO. What are the habits that he's picked up? What has he been reading and why? We've tied all of this together for today's episode, a part 2 on Karthik's life, career, and values. Let's dive right in. Before we get started, let me give you some context. In part 1 of our episode with Karthik Jayaraman, he talked to me about how WayCool functions. And as he was explaining how the organization has grown and changed, I couldn't but help notice a very interesting dynamic in the way WayCool functions. How its organizational structure, policies, and market strategy grew with the demands of the market, the retailers, and the farmers. For instance, Karthik realized that a standard one size fits all credit limit that they had set for their distribution partners ended up impacting the products available to them. So, Karthik suggested quickly increasing the credit limit, to which WayCool's finance team adapted quickly. I wanted to understand this better. That's where we start today's episode. Sounds like you run an organization where every day policies are either being created or modified in some form at a small level, major level, etc. How do you, how does an organization handle this? Because, how do you build to be an organization where policies are both, I think, respected and enforced, at the same time they're also relaxed or challenged or modified when needed?
See, it's not straightforward, and we suffer some of the challenges of too frequent changes in direction as well. We have, I'd love to paint a picture that we're perfect in everything, but in reality, this is very accordion-like. There are periods where we bunch up a number of changes, and there are periods where we sort of chill and keep doing the same thing over and over again. And then I have to go dust things up and say, hey, maybe this is not the best way. Let's figure out what's going on. Or any of my leadership team has to do that. That's how it really works. And therefore, the right way to do this, firstly, if the policies are anchored based on the ground realities of the guys who are in the Gemba, then they are more likely to take. If the policies are rooted in the corporate office, then it's going to be a little harder to enforce unless it's logical for the guy in the Gemba. So if folks
Sorry,
like
what's
us,
a Gemba?
Gemba is the workplace. I mean, sorry, my manufacturing days keep coming back to me. So if the sales guy on the field has to agree that this is this is solving a problem for her or him, only then the policy will take. Otherwise, you will be enforcing something. Either the salesperson will get frustrated and leave, or they will basically find a way around your policy. And that's the reality. So that's the reason field visits again become important. What we also observe is that, see, I am an outsider going to the field and learning. I am not bound by any, biases or filters. And that again helps translate this to the people in the corporate office or to the support functions or to the audit function, saying, hey, this is the reality on the ground. And therefore, you need a way around this. So that is really the first filter. The second is you can't change this too frequently. The right way to do this is you go through a series of large scale transformations and then you get into a Kaizen mode, which is a continual improvement mode. I think our dry groceries business has reached that point. They've done a number of large scale experiments, transformations. The PMF is established. They only need to scale. And while scaling, they have to continually improve as they go. And the continual improvement is best done by small teams and then horizontally deployed by the corporate office. And the corporate office roles is to put in guardrails to make sure that we're accounting for any potential failure modes in that. That's the way I believe it should be done. I will say we are 40% there, so just pass. We have to get to the remaining.
You came into this industry, like you said, from an automotive sector. WayCool is a startup. I mean, you also are a tech startup. You're also selling your own software. What are some of the changes that you observed in the way that, in your earlier career in larger, more established organizations and WayCool?
I think quite a few factors. See, there are the obvious operational factors. You got to do a lot of things yourself. My first act in the company was carrying crates, and Sanjay's first act in the company was sitting in front of a truck selling vegetables. So all that is fine, that everybody goes through that. But I think there are some more nuances to this. You have to accept that there will be frequent revisions to your own hypothesis and to the way business is done. You can't expect that there is a template and I follow the template and things happen. That's the first lesson that I learned. Starting up versus doing a company. WayCool is supposed to be a cold chain company. We're not doing that necessarily now. So those changes you have to accept and digest. And it's not easy for somebody coming from corporate to actually accept and digest those changes. The second is your talent acquisition process will be chaotic.
What made it easier for you?
Because it was a completely different industry and I had no preconceived notions about the industry. I was in child ego mode when I got into the industry. Had I started something in the automotive sector, all my biases would have kicked in. So I still make snide remarks about Tesla. So that's they've got it right, but I still make snide remarks about them because I've got my biases. But it was purely that. I mean, we're all human. If you're going into a new industry, we are in a childlike state, we are learning, we don't have any preconceived notions. It's usually the counterparty who's teaching you who has preconceived notions, so you have an opportunity to challenge that as well. That's the only reason, to be honest.
So one of my favorite analogies is this Greek myth, the ship of Theseus, where there is this ship which is considered like a very important, there's a full mythology behind it. And the Greeks every year they take that ship to a particular place and they bring it back. And for hundreds of years they do that. And every time one of the planks rots, they replace the plank, then they replace the sails and then the oars. So the question is, at the end of this, is it even the ship of Theseus?
Exactly.
So as a startup, the ship of Theseus analogy is that you keep revising your hypothesis. In your case, for instance, WayCool. I mean, is it even the WayCool that it started out as? Do you ever think about that at a philosophical level, that what is this company that I'm running today? What was it 7-8 years ago? And what will it be 7-8 years into the future?
That's a very interesting question. And once in a while we pull back and revisit what we said we will do and check whether we are on it. Purely coincidentally, we still find ourselves playing to a map that we laid out 6 to 7 years ago. It's not intent, maybe it's subconscious, but what happens, how we got there is very different from how we thought we will get there. That was our biggest insight. For example, I still have that sketch somewhere in one of my phones, which shows how we will start with a retail entity, but use that retail to build a large wholesale platform. Then we will get into as deep as contract farming. Then on the front end, we will start adding value, processing and branding, and then we will export.
So you mentioned Tesla. This reminds me of that diagram that Elon Musk had made about how he will first launch the Model 3 and then the next one and the next one, how he will do it. Sorry.
Yes.
That's right.
So that is the drawing that we had made 6 years ago. And every time we go back, it looks like we are on that same path. But how we got there is completely different from how we thought we will get there, to be honest. We thought we will scale by servicing Horeca as a space. Then we realized that we don't have the working
Horeca
capital.
is the hotels
and
restaurants
restaurants and catering. We don't have the working capital to deploy to service that industry. And it's just too price competitive. So then we pivoted to servicing the small retailer. We found that there was more acceptance in that space. So the path was different, but we are still pointing towards that. I'm honestly not bothered. Right? I mean,
what about your investors? You raised venture capital.
That's correct.
One of the, especially as an outsider, or what people think is that when you're presenting a roadmap or a plan to investors, it's like, it's probably a stereotype that people think that you have such confidence in your 3-year plans and you will deliver as per this. But in reality, it's anything but, right? When you go back and have conversation with your board and investors, how have those conversations been when you're like, look, we said we'd do this or we'd reach here, but we reach here through some completely different paths. What do they tell you?
See, that's an interesting question. I will say that because our investors are not the standard set of investors who are diversified, they've been a lot more engaged. And since we catch up every week, if you're catching up every week, then you know what's happening in the company and you're aligned with the directional changes that we are taking.
So the frequency of sampling also that matters, because then it's not coming as a shock at the end of a year or 6 months.
Exactly. So that's something that has helped us so far. But having said that, you touched upon an important point. I feel that different sectors require different investment vehicles and different approaches. Any investor will discount your 3-year plan. That's something we all know, right? Their own internal sensitivity analysis, etc., will be very different.
I feel it's almost like this kabuki dance, right? Where both sides know that, look, we need these. So the people, the entrepreneurs or founders who are preparing the 3-year plans know, okay, we got to put a lot of stuff here so it looks very real. And the investors, like you said, they're discounting it.
Correct.
But at the same time, that document must be exchanged and that handshake must happen.
Exactly. But I feel that all that is driven by the fact that you've got to deliver a certain value at a certain exit point, etc. I think in the long term, different instruments are needed for different sectors. You can't apply an instrument that was originally designed for a Moore's law-based industry onto something like agriculture, where this year's mistakes will be discovered next year. So this requires a different kind of capital, and I think those kind of capital pools are still forming. And those investors will be more understanding of the sector.
It's interesting you say that, because one of the things that we've been reading over the last couple of years is that the agri-tech space or the overall agro space in India has seen a significant rise in investor interest as well. And are you seeing that? You said that investor pools are forming. So is that change happening fast enough?
See, I don't think so. I think we are still at the periphery of the investment lens, to be honest. And yes, there has been an interest. I think the wave one of interest was driven by the same prism with which most investors looked at other sectors such as commerce. I think most of them quickly discovered that is not really the way to look at this sector. Wave 2 of interest is still building up. The fact is, the gestation period for this industry is a little different, a little longer. But there are possibilities of exponential paths. Ultimately, what do you want? You want a rocket ship to go on a parabolic path and launch you on an exponential path. That's really what you're looking
Again,
for.
a wonderful analogy. I've never heard that before, but yeah, very interesting.
So yes, that is applicable in this industry also. But it's going to, I mean, that rocket's going to lift a little harder than others. To give you an example, when we invested in Siddhivinayak Agro, we are investors ourselves. I mean, the founders are the doyens of the industry when it comes to the potato space. And for 11 years, they had been going on a linear growth path. What we understood because we spent more than 2 years with them as customers, and as Hemanji is my mentor as well. So at that point in time, we understood that for them to develop a new seed takes 5 years, and for you to develop the 4th generation of that seed, you've got to go through 4 seasons of potatoes. So it's taken 9 years to develop the 4th generation, which is what is sold to the farmers. And once you do that, the number of seeds that you are growing grows exponentially. So we got lucky that we were able to invest at the right time. And that company, which was doing about 60 crores of revenue a year and a half ago, finished last year at 160 crores of revenue. It's PAT positive as a company. This year they'll do even better. So if an investor had the ability to be patient for more than 10 years, they would have reaped exponential benefits at this stage. And it will really scale up at this point in time because it's geometric progression. The production of potatoes is like geometric progression. So the amount of material that you can sell goes up drastically. And the product is a distinctive product. When it was raining like cats and dogs in Maharashtra, when the traditional varieties gave 20% yield, my potato gave 80% yield, which means it's a climate resilient potato. So the product is differentiated. It is available in geometric progression, and consequently the growth has to be exponential.
Right. So, I mean, this pops another thought in my head. Earlier we talked about branded products at the consumer level.
Yes.
Now you're kind of taking that back and saying that, look, those branded products exist because there is innovation and branding happening at the seed level or at the variety level as well.
Yes.
Is there a lot of that happening right now? I mean, in the produce space, in the fruit space as well,
globally,
where we're going to see differentiated varieties of vegetables and fruits because of that innovation which is taking place?
Yes, globally, yes. I mean, even in India, red okra, for example, has been a recent introduction. 3 or 4 seed companies have launched the product over here. And it's received a very good response. We used to sell 7 varieties of watermelon. The one with the yellow flesh inside, the one that's yellow outside and red inside. So there is a lot of innovation that's starting to hit the markets. It's still a little chaotic and unorganized, but yes, there is substantial innovation, and that will become a source of differentiation. The question here is the medium by which the differentiated product reaches the consumer has been the challenge all along. Our modern trade portfolio of companies...
So it comes back to a continuous supply chain.
Market linkage.
Again, farm to fork.
Who's the market linkage provider that's willing to experiment and take the risk? When we ran the retail chain, we launched these varieties of watermelons. They became popular. Now all the retail chains have started launching those products. So somebody's got to take that first bet for it to reach the market. But yes, what you stated is very critical. Unless you innovate at the seed and innovate in the package of practices, in the long term, you will build a commerce company and not a technology company. Right? Technology doesn't refer only to information technology. It's a very thin sliver of this. All this is where it lies. Now the question is, again, this brings us back to the lens of capital. Capital must have the patience to allow companies to experiment and, within quotes, burn money over there, rather than, today, as you know, the focus has shifted from growth to profitability, and it's profitability with an obsession. Are you cutting fat or are you cutting muscle? I can guarantee you that most of us are cutting muscle in the claim that we are cutting fat. That's the reality. So far, we have resolutely refused to cut muscle. We think we'll get there. But you can't leave your Horizon 3 investments because you're worried about Horizon 1. And that requires enlightened capital to come in and make sure that, okay, as long as you're on this path, it's fine, continue investing over there. That narrative gets oversimplified nowadays, and that's something that we'll have to worry about.
You said, I'm quoting you, when you turn 40, when a midlife crisis hits you, some people buy a Ferrari, others start up. what was the midlife crisis that hit you?
It was exactly this, right? You felt that you'd done a lot of work. I mean, there was a lot of distance but limited displacement. And you start wondering in 20 years hence, are you going to have run a
I
long
must say, there's a
way?
lot of physics in your analogies. I was just thinking what distance versus displacement. Earlier, you talked about rockets, parabolic path versus releasing. But yeah, it's very interesting. I rarely hear so much of physics-based analogies in.
Yeah, maybe subconsciously I like physics. I don't know, but it felt that way, and it felt that any career in a regular corporate environment is going to be that way. The worst regret you can have is looking back after another 20 years and saying, "What have I done with my life other than earn money and take my family to a safer place?" That's not done. You should have left the world a slightly better place than how you found it. You should have. Otherwise, you're no different from an animal if you haven't done that. And that was a very strong feeling in me. And I was feeling bound by this. So it's not about personal glory or your name being etched in permanence anywhere. But on those last 7 minutes, when your life sort of flashes before your eyes, you should feel happy. No, that's really what motivated me, and that's
As an
really what I
aside,
was going through.
I mean, I and Seema, I mean, when we started the Can, I was 40 as well.
Right.
So I could completely empathize or connect with what you were feeling as well. But please,
So that was really what the trigger, and that's really what I was feeling when I was at 40. And why does the midlife crisis happen? Because the people try to create an identity for themselves, saying, "Hey, I have arrived in life, I've done this," and so on. Not I've achieved something in life. I think achieving something is,
arrived versus achieved.
I think achieved is more important. Then achievement takes time. It's taken
What are
8 years so far.
What are your definitions of success and failure?
You built something that stands alone and outlasts you. You built a pool of people that can run an asset, and that asset is recognized by a majority of the people as a business, as a force for good, rather than an asset that has caused damage. That's really my definition
Is
of
there-
success.
I keep detecting this. I think references to doing good, treading lightly, etc. across theme of conversations that we're having. Where did that come from for you? Is it something that came, while you were growing up? Is there some influence to you that it's so important for you?
I won't say it's. I can't recall the trigger, but my first exposure to some form of activism was in college when we had this organization called Green Canopy in IIT. So I was an environmentalist who cut trees. That was an ironic situation to be in.
What's the context?
So, a lot of India is invaded by an alien species called Prosopis juliflora. Prosopis destroys your soil and sucks up the water and prevents other plants from growing nearby. And it's a very, very rapidly growing weed. Prosopis had invaded the IIT campus at that time.
It's a weed, not a tree.
It's a weed.
So it's like closer to a lantana kind of thing?
Parthenium equivalent, but
got it.
much nastier. So if you go to Ramanathapuram district, there are forests of Prosopis where cows have gone in, got lost and become feral. It's scary.
Yeah.
So that's a nasty bush, which at that point there was a lot of fear that it will wipe out the natural biodiversity in IIT Madras. The way Prosopis used to be removed was you either have to dig it out from the roots or you drill it and you pour acid into the roots, in which case nothing else grows. Nothing else grows there. So we were literally, and there were no JCBs in those days. So we were literally going out with our bare hands, either first chopping the tree and then digging out the roots. That was my environmental activism. There, I think, for me, it was still satisfying because it was action rather than activism. I think genuinely we should do stuff and not just raise awareness about stuff. And that helped me over there. When I was in the US, one of my good friends had started up what's today a very large platform. It's called Aid India. And we did a bit to help him raise capital. And, every Wednesday we used to gather together and stuff newspapers And that gave us some incremental income, which we gave to Aid India and so on. So that started exposing me a bit to the social side. But then when I came back to India, I found that many of the organizations in India were more about activism than action. And therefore, I said that this doesn't work for me. It's better if you are building something which is in your normal course of life, but which does it the right way. This was reinforced when I spent a good year in a cement company as part of my McKinsey work. Very interesting company, and the way they thought was very, very different. I was speaking to the plant head. They had the most sophisticated outbound logistics in the world. I mean, they use ships, they use bulkers, and all way ahead of anybody else. But the limestone that they were bringing in was coming in tractors. So, as a McKinsey consultant, I said that cost, why are you doing that? Why can't you bring in conveyors and things like that? And the answer they gave was very interesting. He said when the managing director, when he started this, said that you're taking the land from these farmers to convert them into limestone mines. You can always pay them a lump sum, but if you pay them a lump sum, they'll misuse that money and then they will not have a source of livelihood. Instead, I signed an agreement. It's a gentleman's agreement that I will use the farmers' tractors to move the limestone so that they get steady income. And therefore, you're not.
And the tractor continues to be useful and playing two different roles, like on their field as well as
on
to
their field.
Okay.
They've done more. The mines that were exhausted have been converted to ponds. And therefore, that area has become a 3-crop region rather than a single crop region. To me, that was a glaring example of business as a force for good. It's a marginally higher investment that they have made. And by the way, it helps them also. There are a lot of disruptions in that area. There are groups of people who get into clashes and so on, but they never disturb the supply chain. So supply chain continuity is maintained. Farmers are supportive of the company rather than, anybody who does mining is seen as inimical to the native population. Here the farmers are supportive. And the farmers have gotten an additional material benefit in that the exhausted mines have been converted to lakes and now they're a 3-crop territory rather than a single crop territory. It showed to me that win-wins are possible. That it still sticks in my mind.
You said that WayCool is different from other startups in the way that you're trying to build for the long horizon. You're building to last. But also that you want to develop a company with capable leaders and low attrition. How successful have you been? Because if there is one thing that I think regardless of startup founders that I've met, that I think everyone has struggled to deal with, is low attrition and building leaders for the long term.
I would, if you had asked me this about a year ago, I would have said we've been fairly successful. But now I'm facing challenges, to be honest. I think we need to shift gears now a bit to get back to that rhythm that we were having. What happens is the following. In an industry like ours where, it's an established industry, you initially start hiring based on the people you trust, those who have fought the battles with you on the ground. Then gradually you start bringing in domain experts. Domain experts will align because they understand that they're there for their expertise and not their managerial capability. Then you start bringing in professional managers. That's when differences start emerging in companies on how it should be run. We've been lucky with our professional managers. Most of them have been able to adapt to a startup. But then a professional manager should be treated like one and be allowed to run the business the way they want. The rest of the organization has to sort of make way for the professional manager to run the business they want. What is that balance?
That's an organizational transformation as well.
That's right.
The original folks who have kind of grown and learned with the business versus the new professional managers, right?
Exactly. And then what happens to the original folks who have grown? You've got to see, they're the true warriors who've taken the biggest risks. Of course, they should get rewarded for their risks with ESOPs, etc. But they should also be given meaningful, meaty roles. How is that balance achieved is the struggle that we are going through right now as an organization. While that hasn't been the driver of attrition, that does cause friction, and we're constantly meeting to figure out ways around that friction. So we're constantly reorganizing in a way that we are not.
Has being in Chennai helped? Vis-a-vis, let's say you were headquartered out of Bangalore.
See, it has helped in many ways when it comes to running the business. but it's obviously not very helpful from a capital raise perspective. The Firstly, Tamil Nadu infrastructure is really why we exist today. I was able to predict the arrival of my trucks to plus minus 15 minutes and I was rarely wrong. We have good roads, good industrial infrastructure. With one warehouse, I'm able to serve the city. Traffic till recently hasn't been much of a problem. Power, water, most of those issues are sorted in the state. That helped from a physical perspective. Secondly, I think it's a quieter market with more serious entrepreneurs from whom you can learn. So I learned a lot from the peer group, the names that I was mentioning to you as well. I think we learned a lot. We are naturally a little frugal and grounded because we are there. But the fact is, certain kinds of talent and capital are better sourced from Bangalore. So we do have a significant presence in Bangalore. And I genuinely believe that capital could do better to reach beyond Bangalore and Gurugram. And I don't think it has attempted hard enough. That's my view.
On your personal bandwidth, one of the things that you said is that be hands off, but deep dive once in a while. And you've talked about the concept of the T-shaped manager or leader.
Yeah.
Do you want to kind of tell us why the T-shaped leadership or managerial model appeals to you?
It's somewhat connected to your previous
just ask
question.
you as well what the T-shaped manager is.
It's somewhat connected to the previous question, right? When a particular part of your business has established PMF and you've got professionals running
Product market fit,
and you've got professionals running it, we shouldn't crowd the professionals out. And there you touch lightly. My job becomes to arrange for capital to be provided for the professional and any accesses that they need to fulfill their job. When the product market fit is yet to be established, there are three situations where I believe the entrepreneur has to dive deep. One, where product market fit is yet to be established. Second, where there are problems. And third, where it is a horizon 2 or horizon 3 activity. There are early stage work streams where I try to get more deeply involved. For example, this idea of distributing and branding fruit. I'm a little deeply involved over there because it's still a first of a kind even in India. That's where the PMF is still being worked out. There are areas where occasionally we run into problems in terms of operational issues, etc., which are more cross-functional in nature. Usually it's a trade-off between safeguards versus entrepreneurial freedom. Sometimes it's a trade-off between are you solving for the operational metric of cost versus service levels, efficiency versus responsiveness. There I have to dive a little deep and provide direction. The third, in my head, which is more important, is someone has to see around the corner and start getting prepared. And by definition, the executives will not do it because they're caught up in day to day. They may be capable, but they will not have the time to do it. That becomes my job. Preparing for what could happen next and start building seeds for horizon 2 and 3 becomes my job. I mean, subject to you are having enough time and capital, you have to keep focusing on those as well.
All right. How do you look at your habits, professional or personal? Are you a person who's consciously aware of habits and tries to inculcate habits or change habits?
Yes, I think it's something that I've tried to do continually because when you have to constantly form new habits based on what you are picking up as signals. It's not easy to go out in the field, for example. It's not easy to maintain punctuality, for example. But these are important habits for somebody who's running the show here because people read these as signals. If I make it on time for a meeting, then everybody makes it on time. If I finish a meeting on time, then everybody finishes on time. If I'm there out in the field, your team will also start going out to the field and so on. So it's important to do that. There is inertia. You have to break the inertia and get into these rhythms. Simultaneously, it's important to build a certain rhythm in your daily life. For example, the first 3-4 hours are for me. And
when do they start?
5 through 9 is for me. I do a bunch of things that are intensely personal, My walk, my spiritual activities, all of that take up the first 4 hours. 1.5 hour break in the middle is for me and my family if I'm in Chennai. So I go home for lunch every time, spend time with my wife. She also comes home at the same time, and that's dedicated. And post 7:30, it's my time. This is something that I'm clear about. I have a separate slot between 9 and 10 in the night where I work on occasion. But broadly, this is how we would divide time. I mean, I'm a 7-day week guy because that's the nature of our industry. So I still do the 70 hours, if you will. But this is the way I've tried to break up my times. And within those slots, you will find that it's a little regimented. I've been quite regimented about what I do because it helps. Everybody around you gets aligned around your regimented rhythm.
Has there been a habit that you've either recently, in the last 6 or 12 months, started or stopped?
Podcasts have been started. I mean, no connection with this conversation, but I listen to podcasts for at least an hour because, when you're in your exercising mode or walking, you can do that rather than just listen to music. You're absorbing something. The other is voice notes is something that I've started when I'm walking around. Your ideas also get triggered when you're doing a brisk walk. So I share voice notes to the team whenever I get those ideas and start pumping that out. So these are two habits that I'm starting to build now.
You said your reading has reduced over time. Do you read? Do you still manage to read any books? Because earlier when we were talking, you said you were one of the fans of the original, the magazine, the business feature style of journalism, and we were talking about how that's kind of reduced and it's no longer, it's well past its heyday. But do you read, or do you try to read as well, or has it shifted largely?
I listen a lot more than read. And
have you tried audiobooks?
I have tried audiobooks. So
does it work for you?
It works for me because I absorb it while I'm doing stuff, for example.
Are you the 1x speed person, or are you the I'll speed it up to 1.5x or
1x
2x?
Is fine. I mean,
because I know a lot of people, I have colleagues who are like 1.5x, 1.75x, and I can never just understand
My daughter is at 1.5 to 2x. I'm too old for that. So it's a normal 1x.
How old is your daughter?
My daughter's 16. So I think I listen a lot. Of course, there's a lot of business podcasts that I listen to, but I get fascinated by history and humor. That's really my staple.
Can I ask you for your history and humor podcast recommendations?
So I'll give you book recommendations. I'm right now going through the series by R.C. Majumdar on India. And there's this author that I discovered recently. This is a 105-year-old book on the history of South India that I'm reading right now. I can't remember the author's name on the top of my head.
You can mail it to me later. We'll add it into the show notes.
And I got it from Sriram's podcast. So I listened to Sriram is a historian who documents Chennai history quite extensively. So I listen to his podcasts and watch his videos regularly. It's rare to find folks who talk about the history of the common person. And there's so much to learn from those than, just listening to kings and queens and other hagiographies. So that's interesting.
What do your weekends look like?
Saturdays work. We work 6 days. The office is closed, but I always go to some facility or the other. And Saturdays when my temple visits happen, I visit at least a couple of big temples in Chennai. You're in Chennai, 33,500 temples in your state. So a lot of options. So I do that. Sunday, half a day is with the family, and half a day is split between my parents and reflection. And that's really how it operates. We used to be a lot more weekend travel folks, but daughter is in 11th, so travel has come down a lot.
Do you have personal interests beyond the stuff what we've discussed? Is there something that you've gone deep into, geeked out in recent times?
I have a few interests. I have an enduring interest in automobiles. That's why I got into that space in the first place. And the second is in public policy. I used to be interested in politics, but I realized that it's not my cup of tea. But public policy is something that is of interest to me. Infrastructure and infrastructure areas are of interest to me, and history of the common human in various civilizations is something that fascinates me. And if I weren't doing this, if I choose to retire, I'll probably do a PhD in history. That's the direction in which I will go. So
That would be a very interesting career arc, but I'm sure there's a lot of time for that as well.
Thank you for listening to First Principles, the weekly leadership podcast from the Ken's newsroom. I've been waiting a long time to say weekly instead of fortnightly. Meanwhile, and in parallel, the First Principles newsletter is also weekly now. We're hitting new records each week for community participation, with subscribers sending in book recommendations, personal habits, favorite songs, and of course, Silent Sunday photographs. So, if you're a fan of mental models, leadership, decision making, entrepreneurship, and self reflection, you can rely on us twice each week. Thursdays with the First Principles podcast and Sundays with the First Principles newsletter. You can find links to sign up or submit recommendations in the show notes. Finally, if you like our work, please tell us. Rate or review First Principles wherever you get your podcasts. It's honestly the best judge of a podcast quality and the most reliable way for someone new to find us. This episode was hosted by me, Rohin Dharmakumar, and produced by Anushka Mukherjee. The audio editing is by Rajiv CN, our resident audio engineer. See you next Thursday.